The bitter chill of the Montana winter couldn't compare to the cold emptiness that had settled in Vera Armstrong's heart as she stood beside the empty wooden crib, her tears falling silently onto the small quilt she had stitched with such hope just months before. The harsh realities of frontier life in 1879 had claimed yet another innocent soul, and now her baby girl was gone, buried beneath the frozen ground behind the small homestead she had once believed would hold all her dreams. Vera had not heard the approaching hoofbeats over her quiet sobs, nor the creak of the front door as it opened, allowing a gust of cold air to sweep through the modest cabin. It wasn't until his deep voice broke through her grief that she realized she was no longer alone. "You'll hear laughter here again," came the words, spoken with such certainty that for a moment Vera almost believed them. She turned, hastily wiping her tears with the back of her hand, to see a tall figure standing in the doorway. The winter light silhouetted him, his broad shoulders dusted with snow, the brim of his hat pulled low. It took her a moment to recognize him as Kyle Evanston, the cattle rancher whose property bordered her late husband's homestead to the west. "Mr. Evanston," she acknowledged, her voice hoarse from crying. "I didn't hear you arrive." Kyle stepped inside, removing his hat and holding it respectfully in his hands. The gesture reminded Vera painfully of when the doctor had done the same 3 days ago, right before telling her there was nothing more he could do for little Sarah. "I apologize for intruding, Mrs. Armstrong," he said, his hazel eyes filled with genuine concern. "I came to offer my condolences and to see if there was anything you needed." Vera straightened her shoulders, summoning what little dignity she had left. At 26, she had already lost more than most women twice her age, first her husband Thomas to a logging accident the previous spring, and now her 6-month-old daughter to the winter fever. "That's kind, but I'll manage," she said, though even to her own ears, the words sounded hollow. Kyle nodded but made no move to leave. Instead, he looked around the cabin, taking in the dwindling stack of firewood by the hearth, the meager supplies on the kitchen shelves, and the single oil lamp casting long shadows across the room. "Winter's only just begun, Mrs. Armstrong," he said carefully. "It's no time for a woman to be alone out here." "I'm aware of the season, Mr. Evanston," Vera replied, a flash of irritation cutting through her grief. "But this is my home and I intend to keep it." Kyle's expression softened. "I wasn't suggesting otherwise. But I have a proposition that might help us both." Vera raised an eyebrow, instantly wary. She had heard rumors about wealthy ranchers pushing smallholders off their land, especially widows who couldn't work it properly. "What sort of proposition?" "My sister was supposed to come out from Boston to help with the housekeeping at my ranch, but she's written to say she's gotten engaged and won't be coming after all," Kyle explained. "I need someone to cook and keep house, and you need somewhere safe for the winter. Come spring, you can decide what you want to do about your land." Vera's hand instinctively went to the wedding band she still wore. "I couldn't possibly, it's a business arrangement," Kyle cut in, seeming to understand her hesitation. "You'd have your own room in the main house, and I'd pay you a fair wage. My foreman's wife is there too, so your reputation would be intact." Vera glanced at the empty crib again. Everything in this cabin reminded her of what she had lost. Perhaps a change would help dull the constant ache in her chest. "I'll consider it," she said finally. "But I would need to return here regularly to check on things." Kyle nodded. "Of course. I'll send one of my men to ride with you whenever you wish to visit." 2 days later, Vera found herself seated beside Kyle in his wagon, a trunk containing her few possessions secured in the back. As they pulled away from the cabin, she couldn't bring herself to look back. The small grave marker on the hill was visible enough in her mind without having to see it diminish in the distance. The Evanston ranch was larger than Vera had imagined. The main house was a solid 2-story structure of hewn logs with glass windows, a rarity in this part of Montana territory. Several outbuildings, including a bunkhouse, stables, and a cookhouse, formed a protective semicircle around a central yard. "It's not what you're used to," Kyle said, misinterpreting her silence as disapproval. "No, it's impressive," Vera admitted. "Your family must have been here a long time." "My father came out after the war," Kyle explained as he helped her down from the wagon. "Started with 20 head of cattle and built it up to what you see now." "And your mother?" Vera asked, then immediately regretted it when she saw the shadow pass over his face. "She passed when I was 14, influenza." Vera nodded, understanding all too well the grief that flickered briefly in his eyes. "I'm sorry." Mrs. Wilkins, the foreman's wife, greeted them at the door. She was a plump, motherly woman with kind eyes that assessed Vera quickly. "You poor dear," she said, taking Vera's cold hands in her warm ones. "You come on in now. I've got a stew on the stove and fresh bread cooling." The first few days at the Evanston ranch passed in a blur for Vera. She threw herself into work, grateful for the exhaustion that allowed her to fall into dreamless sleep each night. She rose before dawn to prepare breakfast for Kyle and the ranch hands, spent the mornings cleaning and mending, and the afternoons baking or helping Mrs. Wilkins with whatever tasks needed doing. Kyle himself was often absent, riding out with his men to check on the cattle wintering in the sheltered valleys, or to ensure the fence lines remained intact despite the snow. When he was present, he was unfailingly polite but maintained a respectful distance. It wasn't until nearly 2 weeks after her arrival that Vera found herself truly alone with him. A blizzard had kept everyone close to the main buildings, and after dinner, the ranch hands had retired to the bunkhouse, while Mr. and Mrs. Wilkins had gone to their small cabin just behind the main house. Vera was darning socks by the fire in the main room when Kyle entered, carrying 2 steaming mugs. "I thought you might like some hot chocolate," he said, offering her one of the mugs. "My mother's recipe. She always said there was nothing better for warming the spirit on a cold night." Surprised by the gesture, Vera accepted the mug. "Thank you. That's very thoughtful." Kyle settled into the chair opposite hers, stretching his long legs toward the fire. For a while they sat in comfortable silence, the only sounds the crackling of the flames and the howling wind outside. "Do you have family back east?" Kyle asked eventually. Vera shook her head. "My parents died when I was young. I was raised by my aunt in St. Louis. That's where I met Thomas, my husband. He had dreams of homesteading, building something of his own. And you shared those dreams." Vera considered the question. Had she truly wanted this life, or had she simply followed Thomas because he was all the family she had? "I wanted what he wanted," she said finally. "I wanted him to be happy." Kyle nodded, his expression thoughtful. "And now, what do you want for yourself?" The question caught her off guard. No one had ever asked her that before. I don't know," she admitted. "For so long it was about surviving each day, then it was about keeping Sarah healthy and safe." Her voice broke on her daughter's name. Kyle leaned forward but did not touch her. "It's all right to not know, and it's all right to take time to figure it out." Vera wiped away a tear that had escaped despite her best efforts. "Is that what you did after your mother passed?" A sad smile crossed Kyle's face. "In a way, I was young, but I knew I wanted to make her proud. To build something that would last." "You've certainly done that," Vera said, glancing around the well-appointed room. "The ranch, yes, but a home is more than just buildings and land." He stared into the fire, his expression distant. "My father never remarried. He poured everything into the ranch, but this house, it never really felt like home again, not without laughter and love in it." Vera thought of her own empty cabin, the silent crib. Some losses leave spaces that can't be filled. Kyle's eyes met hers. "I don't believe that. Different, yes. But not empty forever." The next morning, the blizzard had passed, leaving behind a transformed landscape. Everything was covered in pristine white, the sun glinting off the snow so brightly it almost hurt to look at it. Vera was in the kitchen preparing breakfast when she heard a commotion outside. Looking through the window, she saw several ranch hands gathered around something on the ground near the corral. Curious, she wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and stepped outside. As she approached, she could see Kyle kneeling in the snow, his attention focused on what appeared to be a small bundle of fur. "What is it?" she asked, coming to stand beside him. Kyle looked up, his face grim. "Wolf got one of the mares that was about to foal. We found her this morning, but it looks like the foal survived somehow." Vera knelt beside him to get a better look. There, trembling in the snow, was a newborn colt, its spindly legs folded awkwardly beneath it, its dark eyes wide with fear. "The poor thing," she breathed. "Can it survive without its mother?" Kyle's jaw set in determination. "It will if I have anything to say about it, but it'll need constant care for the first few days." Without hesitation, Vera said, "I'll help." For the next week, Vera and Kyle worked in shifts to care for the orphaned colt. They moved it into an empty stall in the barn, made a bed of clean straw, and took turns feeding it warm milk from a bottle fashioned from a calf's feeding device. It was during these quiet hours in the barn that Vera began to see a different side of Kyle. The tough cattle rancher would sit patiently with the wobbling colt, speaking to it in soft, encouraging tones as it learned to suckle from the bottle. "You're good with him," Vera observed one evening as she came to relieve Kyle for the night feeding. Kyle looked up, a rare, unguarded smile on his face. "He reminds me of a colt I raised when I was a boy. That one's mother died too." "What happened to it?" Vera asked, settling onto the stool beside him. "Thunder grew up to be my best cutting horse," Kyle said with pride. "Retired him just last year. He's out in the south pasture living like a king." Vera smiled at the affection in his voice. "You've named this one already, haven't you?" Kyle looked slightly embarrassed. "Hope," he admitted, "seemed fitting." The name struck Vera deeply. Hope was something she had not allowed herself to feel since Sarah's death. Yet here was this tiny creature, born in the harshest of circumstances, fighting to live. "It's a perfect name," she said softly. As the weeks passed, Hope grew stronger. Soon he was standing confidently, then walking and finally prancing around his stall with energy that made Vera laugh aloud. The sound of her own laughter startled her the first time. It had been so long since she had felt anything close to joy that she had almost forgotten what it felt like. The realization brought tears to her eyes. Kyle, who had been watching from the barn doorway, approached cautiously. "Are you all right?" Vera nodded, wiping her eyes. "Yes, I laughed, and then I remembered what you said the day you came to my cabin." Understanding dawned in Kyle's eyes. "That you would hear laughter again. I didn't believe you then." Kyle reached out hesitantly, then seemed to think better of it and dropped his hand. "Life has a way of surprising us, Mrs. Armstrong." "Vera," she said suddenly. "Please call me Vera." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Vera," he repeated, as if testing the name. "Then you must call me Kyle." As February turned to March, the worst of the winter began to ease its grip on the land. The days grew longer, and patches of ground began to appear through the melting snow. With the improved weather, Kyle began making preparations for the spring cattle drive. One evening, as they sat at the kitchen table going over household accounts, Kyle cleared his throat nervously. "I've been meaning to ask you something." Vera looked up from the ledger. "Yes." "The cattle drive will take most of the men away for nearly 3 weeks," he explained. "Including me. I was wondering if you would be comfortable staying here with just Mrs. Wilkins, or if you'd prefer to return to your cabin during that time." The thought of returning to her empty home filled Vera with dread. "I would rather stay here if that's all right. There's still so much to do to prepare for spring." Relief washed over Kyle's face. "Good, that's good. I would worry about you out there alone." The simple admission that he would worry about her stirred something in Vera's chest, a warmth she had thought was gone forever. "Thank you for your concern, but I'm quite capable of taking care of myself." "I never doubted that," Kyle said with a smile. "But even the most capable person deserves someone to watch over them now and then." Vera found herself returning his smile, the warmth in her chest spreading. "Then I suppose it's fortunate that we found ourselves in a position to watch over each other." The evening before the cattle drive, Kyle invited Vera to ride with him to check on a section of fence that had been reported down. It was the first time she had left the immediate vicinity of the ranch since her arrival, and she found herself enjoying the fresh air and the chance to see more of the Evanston land. They rode side by side, Kyle on his sturdy bay gelding and Vera on a gentle mare he had selected for her. The land rolled out before them, the snow receding to reveal patches of brown grass and early spring wildflowers. "It's beautiful," Vera said, taking in the vista of mountains in the distance. "This is my favorite time of year," Kyle admitted, "when everything feels new again." They crested a small hill and Kyle reined in his horse. Below them, a clear stream wound its way through a meadow, the banks already showing touches of green. "This is the eastern boundary of the ranch," Kyle explained. "Your homestead is just beyond those trees." He pointed to a copse of cottonwoods in the distance. Vera felt a pang of guilt that she had not visited her property in weeks. "I should check on the cabin soon," Kyle nodded. "We can ride over there now if you'd like." The cabin looked smaller than Vera remembered, the wood weathered gray against the muddy yard. Kyle dismounted first and helped her down, his hands strong and sure at her waist. The brief contact sent an unexpected shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cool spring air. Inside, the cabin was cold and musty from being closed up all winter. Vera moved about the space, opening the shutters to let in fresh air and light. Everything was just as she had left it: the table with its single chair, the shelf with her few books, the small stove in the corner, and the crib. Vera stopped when she saw it, the familiar ache in her chest returning. She had managed to avoid thinking about it too much during her time at the ranch, keeping busy with work and Hope the colt. But here it was, a stark reminder of all she had lost. Kyle stood in the doorway, watching her with concern. "We don't have to stay if it's too difficult." Vera shook her head. "No, I need to face this. This was our home. Thomas built it with his own hands." "He must have been a good man," Kyle said softly. "He was," Vera agreed, running her hand along the smooth wood of the crib rail. "He was so excited about becoming a father, he never even got to meet Sarah." Kyle stepped into the cabin, coming to stand beside her. "I'm sorry, Vera, for all you've lost." Vera looked up at him, struck by the genuine compassion in his eyes. "Thank you for bringing me here, and for everything else. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't come that day." Something shifted in Kyle's expression, a softening, a warmth that hadn't been there before. For a moment, Vera thought he might reach for her hand, but instead he gestured toward the door. "We should head back before it gets dark," he said, his voice slightly rougher than before. As they rode back to the ranch in the fading light, Vera found herself stealing glances at the man beside her. Kyle Evanston was not what she had first thought, not just the successful, somewhat intimidating rancher, but a man with depth and kindness, who rescued orphaned colts and remembered his mother's hot chocolate recipe. A man who had looked at her grief-stricken face and promised her laughter would return. The cattle drive departed early the next morning. Vera stood on the porch of the main house, watching as Kyle gave final instructions to his foreman before mounting his horse. Just before riding off, he turned and tipped his hat to her, a gesture both respectful and somehow intimate. Vera found herself missing him almost immediately, a realization that both surprised and unsettled her. It had been barely 4 months since she had lost Sarah, just over a year since Thomas's death. Was it disloyal to feel this pull toward another man so soon? Mrs. Wilkins, observing her pensive mood as they prepared dinner that evening, patted her hand sympathetically. "The house always feels empty when they're gone on the drive." "I'm sure it does," Vera said noncommittally. The older woman gave her a knowing look. "Mr. Evanston has been different since you came, lighter somehow." Vera felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I'm just the housekeeper, Mrs. Wilkins." "Of course you are, dear," Mrs. Wilkins replied with a smile that suggested she believed otherwise. "And I'm just the foreman's wife." The days passed slowly without the usual bustle of ranch activity. Vera kept busy with spring cleaning, airing out rooms that had been closed for the winter and washing every curtain and bed cover in the house. In the evenings, she worked on a quilt she had started, using scraps from worn-out shirts and dresses. A week into the cattle drive, a spring storm blew in from the mountains. Rain lashed against the windows and wind howled around the eaves of the house. Vera found herself worrying about Kyle and his men out on the trail. Mrs. Wilkins tried to reassure her. They'll have found shelter. Mr. Evanston knows those trails better than anyone. That night, Vera dreamed of Sarah. In the dream, her daughter was laughing, her small face alight with joy as Kyle lifted her high in the air. The image was so vivid, so real that when Vera woke, she could almost hear the echoes of that laughter. The dream stayed with her throughout the day, not as a source of pain as memories of Sarah usually were, but as something different. A possibility she had not allowed herself to consider. The storm passed, leaving behind mud and fallen branches but no serious damage. Vera was in the barn checking on Hope when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Her heart leaped, thinking it might be Kyle returning early, but it was just one of the young ranch hands who had stayed behind. Mrs. Armstrong, he called, dismounting quickly. There's trouble at your place. The creek's overflowed its banks with the storm. Water's gotten into your cabin. Vera's mind raced. The cabin might not have been her home for months, but it held all the memories of her life with Thomas and Sarah. How bad is it? Pretty bad, madam. I rode by on my way back from checking the east pasture. Floors covered in water and it's still rising. I need to go there, Vera said, already moving toward the tack room to saddle a horse. Mr. Evanston said you weren't to ride out alone, the young man protested. Then you'll just have to come with me, won't you? Vera replied, her tone leaving no room for argument. The damage was indeed severe. The creek had swollen to twice its usual size with the spring runoff and rain, sending water rushing across the low ground where the cabin stood. When they arrived, the floor was under several inches of murky water. Vera waded in, her skirts hiked up, determined to save what she could. The ranch hand helped her move the small trunk containing Thomas's clothes and her wedding dress to higher ground. They managed to salvage her books and a box of letters, but many items were already ruined. As they worked, Vera kept casting anxious glances at the crib. It was made of sturdy oak and wouldn't be damaged by the water, but the bedding inside the quilt she had sewn during her pregnancy, the small pillow embroidered with Sarah's name, those were at risk. I need to get the things from the crib, she told the ranch hand who was struggling to move the heavy table. We should leave, Mrs. Armstrong, he said, eyeing the still rising water nervously. It ain't safe. Just a few more minutes, Vera insisted, making her way to the corner where the crib stood. The water had indeed reached the bedding. Vera carefully lifted the sodden quilt, tears mingling with the water dripping from the fabric. This was all she had left of her daughter, these small things made with love and hope. A loud crack from outside startled them both. The ranch hand rushed to the door. Madam, we gotta go now. The bridge over the creek is about to wash out. Clutching the wet bundle to her chest, Vera followed him outside. Sure enough, the small footbridge that crossed the creek between her property and the Evanston ranch was groaning under the pressure of the rushing water, one support post already tilting dangerously. They mounted quickly and urged their horses to the crossing. The ranch hand went first, his horse picking its way carefully across the creaking wood. Vera followed, her heart in her throat as she felt the bridge swaying beneath them. They were halfway across when there was another crack, louder this time, and Vera felt the bridge shift sideways. Her horse reared in panic, nearly throwing her. She managed to stay in the saddle, but the bundle she'd been holding fell into the churning water below. No. Vera cried, watching helplessly as Sarah's quilt was swept away by the current. Keep moving. The ranch hand shouted from the other bank. Tears blinding her, Vera urged her frightened horse forward. They had just reached solid ground when the bridge collapsed completely, the wooden planks disappearing into the swollen creek with a tremendous crash. Back at the ranch, Vera sat wrapped in a blanket by the fire, a cup of hot tea in her hands. Mrs. Wilkins had exclaimed in horror when they'd returned, soaked to the skin and covered in mud, and had immediately set about making them comfortable. "You could have been killed," the older woman scolded as she stoked the fire. "What would Mr. Evanston say if I let anything happen to you?" "The cabin," Vera said dully, still in shock from the day's events. "Everything in it." "Things can be replaced," Mrs. Wilkins said firmly. "People can't." Vera thought of the quilt now lost forever, and fresh tears welled in her eyes. "Not everything." Later that night, alone in her room, Vera allowed herself to truly grieve not just for the lost mementos, but for the life she had once imagined. The homestead she and Thomas had dreamed would be their legacy was now damaged beyond what she could repair alone. The family they had planned to raise there would never be. Yet as she cried, she found the pain was different than it had been before. Less sharp, more like an ache for what might have been rather than a raw wound. And through her tears, she could see the faces of those who had helped her survive Mrs. Wilkins with her motherly concern, the young ranch hand who had risked himself to help her, and Kyle, whose absence she felt more keenly with each passing day. The cattle drive returned 2 days later, earlier than expected due to favorable conditions on the trail. Vera was in the kitchen preparing dinner when she heard the commotion of their arrival. Through the window, she could see Kyle dismounting, his tall figure unmistakable even at a distance. She smoothed her apron nervously, suddenly aware of how much she had been looking forward to his return. Before she could decide whether to go out to greet him or wait for him to come inside, Mrs. Wilkins bustled into the kitchen. "They're back, and Mr. Evanston is already asking for you," she said with a knowing smile. "He heard about what happened at your cabin." Vera's heart sank. "I suppose he's angry that I disobeyed his instructions not to ride out alone." "I wouldn't say angry," Mrs. Wilkins replied cryptically. "But you'd best go see for yourself." Kyle was in the study, still in his trail clothes, his hat in his hands. When Vera entered, he turned quickly, his eyes scanning her as if checking for injuries. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice tight with concern. "Jenkins told me what happened at the creek." "I'm fine," Vera assured him. "Just a bit shaken. I'm sorry I went against your wishes." Kyle shook his head. "That's not important." When I heard the bridge collapsed, he trailed off, running a hand through his hair in agitation. "I should have been here." "You had responsibilities to the herd," Vera said. "You couldn't have known there would be a storm." "I've arranged for some of the men to go assess the damage to your cabin once the water recedes," Kyle said, moving to his desk and shuffling some papers. "Whatever needs to be repaired, I'll see to it." Vera was touched by his generosity. "That's very kind, but I can't accept such charity." Kyle looked up, a flash of something like hurt crossing his features. "It's not charity, Vera, it's—" He hesitated, seeming to search for the right words. "It's what neighbors do for each other." Neighbors. The word felt inadequate somehow, given all they had shared over the past months. "Thank you," she said finally, "but I've been thinking. Perhaps it's time I considered what to do with the homestead. I'm not sure I can manage it alone." Kyle set his hat down and took a step toward her. "What are you saying?" "I might sell it," Vera admitted. "Find somewhere in town, perhaps, or—" She hesitated, not quite ready to voice the other option that had been growing in her mind, staying at the ranch, not as a housekeeper but as something more. "Or," Kyle prompted softly. The moment was interrupted by a knock at the study door. It was Mr. Wilkins, coming to report on the condition of the cattle after the drive. "We'll continue this conversation later," Kyle said, his eyes holding Vera's for a moment longer before he turned to his foreman. That evening, after dinner had been served and cleared, Kyle invited Vera to join him on the front porch. The spring night was mild, the sky clear and filled with stars. They sat side by side in the wooden rocking chairs, the silence between them comfortable. "I missed this place while I was gone," Kyle said eventually. "More than usual." Vera glanced at his profile, strong and steady in the starlight. "The ranch missed you too?" Kyle turned to look at her, his expression serious. "Just the ranch." Vera's breath caught at the directness of his question. No, she admitted softly. Not just the ranch. Kyle reached across the space between them, his hand finding hers. His touch was warm and gentle, his calloused fingers enveloping hers with care. I thought about you every day on the trail. Wondered if you were thinking of me too? I was, Vera whispered, her heart pounding. More than I should have, perhaps. Kyle's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. Why do you say that? Vera looked down at their joined hands. It hasn't been very long since Sarah. And Thomas before that. Sometimes I feel guilty for feeling anything other than grief. Grief doesn't follow a timetable, Vera, Kyle said gently. Neither does healing, or finding someone who makes you want to look toward the future again. Vera met his gaze, seeing in his eyes the same careful hope she felt in her own heart. And is that what you want, a future? Kyle nodded, his grip on her hand tightening slightly. I've been alone a long time, built this ranch, made it successful, but coming home to an empty house each night. That's no kind of life, not really. No, Vera agreed. It isn't. When I saw you that day, standing by your daughter's crib, I felt, I don't know how to describe it, like something was pulling me to you, and every day since, that feeling has only grown stronger. Vera felt tears welling in her eyes, but they weren't tears of grief this time. I never expected to feel this way again, never thought I'd want to. Kyle lifted his free hand to her face, gently wiping away a tear that had escaped. I'm not asking for promises, Vera, just a chance. A chance to see if what's growing between us might become something lasting. Vera leaned into his touch, her heart full in a way it hadn't been in so long. I'd like that, she whispered. April brought warm days and fields of wildflowers. Vera's cabin had indeed suffered significant damage, and after much consideration, she decided to sell the homestead to a young couple newly arrived from Ohio. The money would give her options, a sense of security she hadn't felt since Thomas's death. Kyle had not pressed her about her plans, but Vera could sense his growing anxiety as the sale of her property neared completion. They had settled into a comfortable routine, taking evening walks around the ranch property, Kyle sometimes reaching for her hand as they discussed the day's events. One Sunday afternoon, Kyle suggested they ride out to see Hope, who had been moved to a paddock where he could graze and exercise. The colt had grown remarkably in the month since his rescue, his coat gleaming with health, his legs strong and sure. As they leaned on the fence watching Hope frolic with another young horse, Kyle cleared his throat nervously. I've been thinking, he began, his eyes fixed on the horses. About what you said regarding selling your cabin. Vera's heart quickened. Yes. I was wondering if you'd given any thought to what you'll do afterward. Where you'll go. Vera turned to look at him, taking in his strong profile, the way the sun brought out the gold in his brown hair. Over the past months, she had come to know this man, his quiet strength, his kindness, the way he treated everyone from his foreman to the newest stable boy with respect. She had also come to recognize the loneliness in him, a mirror of her own. And gradually, almost without realizing it, she had fallen in love with him. I thought I might stay here, she said softly, if I'm still needed. Kyle turned to face her, hope and uncertainty warring in his expression. As the housekeeper, Vera took a deep breath, gathering her courage. Is that the only position available? A slow smile spread across Kyle's face, lighting his eyes in a way that made Vera's breath catch. No, he said, reaching for her hands. There's another position I was hoping you might consider. He dropped to one knee there in the spring grass, still holding her hands in his. Vera Armstrong, I know it hasn't been long, and I know you've endured more heartache than anyone should have to bear. But you've brought light back into my life, and I can't imagine my future without you in it. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Tears sprang to Vera's eyes, but they were tears of joy. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, I will marry you, Kyle Evanston. Kyle rose to his feet, pulling her gently into his arms. His lips found hers in a tender kiss, a promise of all that was to come. When they broke apart, both were smiling through tears. I love you, Vera, Kyle said, his voice rough with emotion. I think I've loved you since that first day when I saw you standing by that empty crib with such courage even in your grief. Vera raised a hand to his cheek, her heart full to bursting. And I love you. You were right, you know. About what? You said I would hear laughter again. And I have here with you. They were married in June, a simple ceremony in the garden behind the main house. Mrs. Wilkins had outdone herself decorating with wildflowers and ribbons, and the entire ranch staff attended, along with neighbors from miles around. Vera wore a new dress of pale blue silk that Kyle had ordered all the way from Denver, with a crown of daisies in her hair. As she walked toward him, his face alight with love and pride, she felt a sense of rightness of coming home. That night, as husband and wife, they stood together on the porch of what was now their home, Kyle's arms wrapped securely around her from behind as they gazed at the stars. "Happy?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "More than I ever thought possible again," Vera answered truthfully. She turned in his arms to face him. "Kyle, there's something I need to tell you." A flicker of concern crossed his face. "What is it?" Vera took his hand and placed it gently on her stomach. "In about 7 months, this house is going to be filled with new life." Kyle's eyes widened, his expression shifting from shock to wonder to pure joy. "A baby, you're sure?" Vera nodded, smiling through happy tears. "Dr. Miller confirmed it yesterday when I was in town." With a whoop of delight, Kyle lifted her off her feet, spinning her around before carefully setting her down again. "A baby," he repeated in awe, placing his hand reverently on her still flat stomach. "Our baby." "I never thought I'd have this chance again," Vera admitted, her voice catching. "After Sarah, I thought that part of my life was over." Kyle pulled her close, his strong arms gentle around her. "I can't promise that everything will be perfect or that there won't be hard times ahead, but I can promise that you won't face them alone, not ever again." "I know," Vera said, resting her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "And that makes all the difference." As winter approached again, Vera stood at the window of the upstairs bedroom, watching the first snowflakes of the season drift lazily to the ground. Behind her, Kyle was putting the finishing touches on a beautiful oak crib one he had been working on in secret for weeks. At 7 months pregnant, Vera's belly was round and full, the baby within active and strong. Dr. Miller had pronounced both mother and child in excellent health at her last visit, easing the anxiety that had plagued Vera as her pregnancy progressed. "There," Kyle said, stepping back to admire his handiwork. "What do you think?" Vera turned from the window to see the completed crib. It was a work of art, the wood polished to a warm glow, intricate carvings of wildflowers decorating the headboard. Draped over the side was a new quilt that Mrs. Wilkins had helped her sew, made partly from scraps of Kyle's old shirts and Vera's dresses. "It's perfect," Vera said, crossing the room to run her fingers over the smooth wood. "Absolutely perfect." Kyle came to stand beside her, his arm around her waist. "Just think in a couple of months our son or daughter will be sleeping here." "Son," Vera said confidently, patting her belly. "I'm sure it's a boy, I can feel it," Kyle chuckled. "Well, boy or girl, this little one is already loved beyond measure." A sudden kick from within made Vera gasp and laugh. "Feel," she said, taking Kyle's hand and placing it where the baby was most active. "He's saying hello to his papa." The wonder on Kyle's face as he felt his child move never failed to touch Vera's heart. This strong, capable man who could gentle a wild horse or face down cattle rustlers without flinching was completely undone by the miracle growing within her. "Hello there, little one," he said softly, kneeling to speak directly to her belly. "Your mama and I can't wait to meet you." Vera threaded her fingers through Kyle's hair, overwhelmed with love for this man and the family they were creating together. "I never imagined I could be this happy again," she admitted. Kyle stood, gathering her in his arms. "When I found you that day, crying beside an empty crib, all I wanted was to take away your pain. I had no idea that you would end up bringing so much joy into my life." "We've both been given a second chance," Vera said, resting her head on his shoulder. A new beginning. The first of many, Kyle promised, his lips finding hers in a tender kiss. Thomas Evanston was born on a clear January morning, entering the world with a lusty cry that brought tears of joy to his parents' eyes. With a shock of dark hair like his father's and his mother's clear blue eyes, he was a perfect blend of them both. As Vera nursed her son in the rocking chair beside the bedroom window, Kyle perched on the arm beside her, his face alight with pride and love. Outside, the Montana winter sparkled in the sunshine, the ranch peaceful under its blanket of snow. "He's perfect," Kyle whispered, gently stroking his son's downy head. "Yes, he is," Vera agreed, looking up at her husband with a heart so full it felt it might overflow. "And so is this our family, our home, our life together." From the nursery corner came the soft jingling of the mobile Kyle had crafted to hang above the crib tiny wooden horses that spun in the breeze, waiting for the day when Thomas would be placed beneath them. "Listen," Kyle said, his voice full of wonder. "Do you hear that?" Vera smiled, understanding his meaning perfectly. "Yes," she said, looking from her husband to their newborn son and back again. "I hear laughter here again, just like you promised."